Our organization has an annual budget of about $750,000, and we have no paid staff, just consultants who help us on a project basis, in addition to a contracted firm that does our admin and manages our books. We have undergone an annual audit for several years, but we're rethinking this. It's very expensive, and we've never had any partners or funders ask to see it. We don't apply for grants either. We're leaning toward doing an audit every 2 to 3 years instead of annually. What are your thoughts on this? Is there any reason to think we need to continue with an annual audit when we seem to have all of our finances under control?
What an interesting question. No one's ever asked, as far as I know, I've never encountered this question before. So I think probably what you want to do is take a step back. I'm assuming, because there's no staff, I'm assuming this question is coming from a board member, right? That's the only other person that could ask the question, right? I think like you need to take a step back and ask yourself what the audit's for. So it isn't necessarily, I don't think as a board member for an organization, I wouldn't look at an audit as a checklist item, as something that you just have to get because somebody told you do. I think an audit is an external set of eyes that is totally disinterested from your organization that can then look at everything that's going on in your organization and point out potential challenges. Whether or not it's conflict of interest. I think in your organization, I personally would be very concerned, since you've just got consultants and you don't have any staff. I would be very concerned because this means that there's nobody with their eyes on the organization 24/7. You've got no executive director whose job it is to do all of the operational tasks. You've then moved all those operational tasks up to the board level. And as we know, as board members, like that's a very low level of supervision. Even the best, most functional boards are not thinking about your organization all day, every day. They're thinking about it before the board meeting happens or when somebody asks them a question. It's not 24-hour supervision. So in this situation, I would be concerned that, are my consultants getting paid the appropriate wage? Does that make sense? Is there a hole in the way that we're operating that money is leaking out of that no one's noticed because we're not paying attention to this 24/7, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad that your finances are under control. That's a good thing to hear. I would look at, and maybe you don't feel like you're getting the benefit of the expense of the audit because the auditor is just doing it as a checklist. So maybe you've got the wrong audit firm who's just coming in and going, yeah, everything looks good, right? Here's a letter. That I don't think that's got much value to it either. What you want to get from an auditor is, we've looked at everything. We've looked at all of the systems, and here are places we think you can improve. And that's where that's where the audit pays for itself. Not as a smiley face on your homework that says good job, but instead of like that, it's something that says, okay, good job, but here are all the other ways that you can make your organization stronger, have less potential financial pitfalls, things that you may not have noticed because you're not paying attention to this all the time, and getting sort of an external expert to come in and say, this is where you can make your organization better. So from that perspective, I'd say that an annual audit, I would say, is something that you should have, especially at $750,000 a year. I get it that it's expensive, but you should be getting what you pay for. And if you're not, look for another audit firm.
I do think the question sounds like somebody, though, who is doing this has looked at the audit less as something to make them as efficient or effective of an organization, and more about, this is a checklist item, to your point, and more of, okay, if I have donors and funders that don't ever ask for this. So it feels very external sort of focused instead of internal. What kind of organization do we want to be? What do we, what will make us feel like we've met our fiduciary duty? Are there ways, to your point, that we can just improve and do things better or sounder or more efficiently, or just to give even that level of comfort? So I do like the idea of, it's not necessarily a quick answer, but it also, tell me if I hear you, that you're recommending, right, especially for an organization this size, and given some reflection that you mentioned, that someone do this annually. But you also aren't saying that if they chose not to, that would be the end of the world, or if they chose to move it to every 2 to 3 years.
No, I don't. I mean, No, you could do that. You could not get an audit at all, but you're opening yourself up to, I mean, especially because you've got a contracted firm that's doing your administration and managing your books. You're really sort of opening yourself up to potential fraud later on because you've got nobody outside the organization that isn't on the board that's looking at things, that understands how things are supposed to be done. It sounds like everything's going smoothly. That's a risk. If your board is comfortable with that risk, go for it. It's not something I would do.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacy Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with my fantastic, super amazing co-host Stacy Wedding, and we are here to answer all kinds of nonprofit questions for you. So the way this works is you send us some questions. Easiest way to do that, to be honest, is emailing it to questions@nonprofiteverything.com. Or if you go to the nonprofiteverything.com website, there is a big, shiny, red, candy-like button that you can push, and that'll create a web form that you can just sort of fill out. And you send us those questions, and then Stacy and I do our best to research and answer them. If we can't figure it out, we rope in the assistance of a guest expert. And we've had some pretty good guest experts lately. So send us the hard ones if you got them, and we will go fishing for somebody who can answer it appropriately. Or send us easy ones, and Stacy and I will answer those as well. So this is your nonprofit resource to kind of get your stuff answered without having to pay some expensive consultant or, troll Google, which who knows if that's going to work for you. Or we're here 24/7 for you. There's 136 episodes, I think, already taped, and each one of them has at least 2 or 3 questions in it. So that's like all the questions. So go and look in that archive as well. There's plenty of stuff there for you to see if maybe that question's already being answered. And you know what? We'll answer them again. If you ask us the same question in year 2, you don't have the time. Let's say you don't have the time to go research all of the previous stuff that we've answered. Just ask us again, and it'll show up in a few weeks. That's how it works. It's pretty great. So thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking your time to listen. And with that, we'll jump right in. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for years, and there's one thing I really struggle with from an ethical standpoint. How can nonprofits justify accepting tainted money that was earned by a company whose profit comes from activities that are in direct conflict with a nonprofit's mission? How do you determine what is dirty money and what to accept or not? Is it okay to accept these types of donations or sponsorships and just not publicize them?
Ooh, this feels like it could be an episode.
Oh, I love this one. This is a great question. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Well, you have pinpointed it, right? Not all gifts are created equal. And this is where, so I want to talk about the realities of this, but I also want to talk about some solutions or some ways to think through this. Right? Like none of us are going to accept money that's stolen or embezzled. And so there is something to be said. So if we're not going to do that, then if we're going to accept money from a company that goes in direct opposition to our mission, like, doesn't that feel kind of slimy? And that's what I'm sensing from your question is like, so like at what point? And, I struggle with this. So I'm just going to be real here. Like I struggle because at what point perhaps someone had some nefarious or some activities in the past or a company in the past went completely and their activities went against our mission. But they've changed their ways. So like, does that mean we don't ever accept money from them? Or they're in the midst of changing some of the way they operate business. So that adds a layer of complexity. And then who am I to become the judge of, like, don't we, when we look at everybody to some degree, isn't there some scandal or something in most like at what point do we draw the line? Because when you say no to one, like where do you draw that line that we say no to you but yes to you, but you both, is it because your work is still inappropriate and like not for the public good and it goes against just sort of the public good, and so now I'm not going to but it doesn't necessarily directly impact our mission negatively or isn't totally counter to our mission. So it's okay then. Like, so for me, what I struggle with, and I'm assuming the person asking this is struggling with, is like, where is that? Is there a line? And I don't think it's that simple at all, of course. But I think it's sort of a question we have to ask ourselves is like, what are the things? What are our values? What are our mission? Are there things that we are willing to say no to out of principle because it's not right? And then there's the flip side of it. So like, I'm probably complicating this more than helping this, right? But then there's the flip side of it, where there are people that say it's unethical not to take the money. It's unethical not to take the money that now I can, as an organization, channel toward public good and toward our mission. So those are just a few schools of thought just off the top of the head. I do have ideas of how you can start to unravel or figure this out. But before I jump into that, I would love your thoughts, Andy, on it.
I think this question is so great. And so part of this is that, so Stacy and I, at least for today, are both based in Las Vegas. And this is something that's come up for nonprofits in this community for years, is when the money is coming from an organization that may be doing something that you personally disagree with, or that your organization maybe runs 100% counter to what your organization is doing. Like, are you doing something that's unethical by effectively sanitizing what the donor's doing? And I'll give a perfect example. So back when I worked at the food bank, one of the strip clubs did a holiday promotion where if you brought a can of food, so like they did a can drive, if you brought a can of food, you got into the strip club for free. They called this promotion Cans for Cans, which I thought was hilarious. And there was some internal dialogue at the food bank of whether or not this is something that we wanted to discuss, promote, take money from. And there was lots of conversation in the office about it. I, being the finance guy, fell down on the side of, what difference does it make? Like, we're not telling people to become strippers. Like, this is not something that we're not actively promoting going into sex work. That's not something that we were like saying by accepting the money from the promotion. And it's still Las Vegas. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that that's what the city got built on. It's part of the community. And the fact that the strip club wanted to do that and thought of the food bank as the recipient of this thing and thought it would be something that would be fun to do, like, who are we to get in the way of their fun? That was kind of my perception of it. I recognize that that's not, that when, for me, that doesn't really feel like a mission ending relationship. That if that got out to be public and the newspaper decided to write a giant story about it, we aren't going to lose massive amounts of donors over that particular relationship. But there are scenarios in which that could be the case, like depending on what your mission is and what the organization that's giving you money is. That could be something that you would have a very difficult time explaining to other donors. Like, why did you engage with this if this is something that's antithetical to what you're supposed to be solving? So yeah, totally understand the frisson about this particular question. So Stacy, what do you think? How do you draw a box around when it's cool? Like, what's the Venn diagram look like? Cool to accept, not cool to accept. Like, how do we make that decision?
So I think that there needs to be as objective as you can make it. A small group of people, right? Task force, committee. Maybe some of you may have heard about creating a gift acceptance committee for these kinds of, it can be for complicated gifts that are not just cash gifts, but it also can be about gifts like this. So I think having some sort of committee or task force that comes together to kind of put up or to create your own framework for making these types of decisions. So really, and then that committee is looking at, what are our values as an organization, right? What are are we okay? Like, and putting themselves through the paces of all the different scenarios. I mean, you're never going to come up with every single scenario, but right, like, do we accept it and just not broadcast it, or not put their logo, or not have them come to our event and speak at our event, whatever? Like, where is that line? And thinking through different scenarios, but thinking through it from a standpoint of like coming up with some criteria, like, is this going to jeopardize our brand or our trust in the community? It's a huge one, right? It's one of the core roles of a board to manage and uphold the brand of an organization. So is there a strong likelihood? Do we have reason to believe? And if we're not sure, perhaps and I know there's not always time to do this, right? This is ideal if you have time, but like, can we get some key stakeholders from different lenses to sort of give us their gut check, like, on this, right? Is it okay if it's more of something like that's just a public like something that's impacting the public because of what this company's doing, but it doesn't impact our mission? Is that okay? So I think coming up with the framework and criteria around like, what is really core important to us, that it doesn't matter how large the gift, because right, let's be honest, it's hard. If it's a really large gift and someone says, and you don't want to turn down that gift, you desperately want that money, right? So you've got to really be solid with, okay, does this uphold and protect our brand? Does this keep us in line with our mission, or does it raise doubt? I mean, one of the things nonprofits you think about like are established for is sort of the public is entrusting us, like there's a trust level, like entrusting nonprofits to actually hold and steward assets. So does this jeopardize the public trust, or is this like kind of not a big deal? Sort of like the example, like what falls into that? And I don't think there's a yes or no. I think it's something that you've got to, though, have some sort of framework or questions or rating system or criteria. Like, this is important enough to us that we're going to make sure we don't fall down the slippery slope path. And you probably need people on that committee that are not going to be the people, and no disrespect to finance people or fundraisers, right? You want the money. So what I find is, right, I tend to find these kinds of topics are harder for people in the program line of work, right? Because it just is different, right? And your job is impacted differently by these decisions. So I think you need to probably have a well-rounded committee. So it's not all people who are trying to get more money into the organization, because we know where they're probably going to decide they're going to probably fall on. And if we had all program people, that could be dangerous too. So like, how do we have a diverse group of people? And if there's some people that are less tied to this, but are really good, objective, neutral sources on the committee. And so then you've got this nice little framework with a few questions or a few things that you sort of score, your criteria to say yes or no to a gift. I mean, that's what I would do. But I know that's not easy either, because, one of the examples, and I think, Andy, I don't know if you've brought it up or if I read it somewhere, but so there was kind of scandal with the Metropolitan Museum of Art back in like 2019, when they ultimately decided to stop taking donations from this family who was linked to the opioid crisis through their pharma company, right? And there was a lot of brouhaha, and anyone who wants to look it up can probably find a lot of information on it. But and the Metropolitan Museum of Art didn't do this immediately, but other museums did and started being like, we're not taking donations from this family. And what does the opioid crisis have to do with the museum's mission? Nothing. But it was a big enough deal that these museums, right, decided not cool. Like, we're just against, like, there is enough baggage with this donor and this donation that we're not going to take it. And so, when you read about the whole situation, eventually, right, there was protest and pushback on the Met for not initially like changing their ways. And so they ended up amending their gift acceptance policy and doing some other things to make it that they would not accept the money. But they also had a lot of backlash from that, right? The impact for donors, the impact from the bad press and the brand that came from something like this. Like, I think in today's world, this is even a hotter topic. So I'm just sitting there going, how do you protect your organization, protect all of your assets, and not be short-sighted because you're really hungry for that large donation? So I probably would lean toward being more cautious on this than not. And I don't even want to start to tackle, I don't know, do you accept the money and then just say, sorry, we're not going to put your logo anywhere? I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that one.
So this is the day where this became a political podcast, right?
Oh, yikes.
We went from being totally like, let's just answer some nonprofit questions to like, let's wade knee deep into American partisan politics, right? So, and the reason that comes up is when you're looking at it, and Stacey, totally agree. Everything that you just said, I'd say 100% you're right. You need to figure out where the line is and then draw the line there and just be on one side of it, right? We need to recognize sort of that not all nonprofits are 100% like we're everything to everyone. Like the food bank is like sort of the canonical example of like, this is a nonpartisan thing. Like we are going to feed as many people as we possibly can. We will take donations from as many people as we possibly can. We're going to talk about policy. We're going to talk about things like SNAP benefits and making sure that people can get SNAP benefits. But in general, like we're not on one side of the line or other. Right. We're not going to have, we're not actively campaigning against somebody that's saying one thing. I think that's changing like over time as the two political parties sort of veer off.
Yes.
Or actually one political party veers off and the other one like is confused and tries to catch up and figure out what they're for. Again, not a political podcast. So what you need to do is sort of look at it from the perspective of the donor a lot of times. Is like, why are they giving you the money? So from a CSR perspective, and I'll put on my corporate social responsibility hat for just a minute, because there's an awful lot of research that talks about when corporate philanthropy is useful and when it's not useful and why you want to do it and why you don't want to do it. So for years, you would see people like Exxon and Chevron and Mobil and Royal Dutch Shell, and all these companies would then put money into nonprofits that were trying to sanitize their image. So Chevron would give tons of money for reef repair, like coral reef repair. And what we've discovered over time is that doesn't actually change the opinion of anybody about what Chevron is doing. So they're giving money to repair coral reefs, and everybody totally understands. If you ask anybody, like, hey, Chevron gave money, are they a better company? The answer is no. They're still a oil and gas company. They're still an extractive industry. They're still destroying the oceans, right, with rigs or whatever the reason is, right? So giving money to directly counteract the negative things that your company is doing is not an effective CSR strategy. And if a company's doing that, they need to recognize that that's not something that's going to give them any benefit. And where that sort of becomes information that a nonprofit can use is that, believe it or not, those donors that are giving you money can communicate with you. Like, you can talk to them about that. And you can say, like, by the way, just so you know, there's lots of research that shows that if you are in the oil industry and you are giving money for environmental causes, that's a totally transparent play and you're not going to get any PR from it. So let's talk about what you really want from us. Like, because if you're looking for something to sanitize your image, like giving the gift to us is not going to do that for you. So having your logo on our website doesn't do you any favors. It doesn't do us any favors. Like, so what do you really want from this? And if it's that sanitization, like, let's find you another organization that you can give money to that isn't us. Because we recognize, we want to recognize your generosity. We just want to make sure that you're not giving the money to us for the wrong reasons. So that's one sort of box that you can put something in. That sanitization box is not effective, and you can have a conversation with your donor about that. So the other box, so sanitization is one box. The other box is when the company that's giving you money is just sort of broadly unethical. Like, you just don't agree with what they do. And this could be anything. I mean, it doesn't necessarily it could be the political position of the founder. It could be something like the Sacklers, right? Where they've potentially made billions of dollars on something that was unethical because they were driving people to use this product, which has now become very, very dangerous across the country. You could disagree with them because their founder said something goofy and political. You could disagree with them because of just the industry that they're in. Like you may, if you are uncomfortable, and again, we're in Las Vegas, if you were uncomfortable with the fact that casinos make money from gambling, that's something that you're against, you might not want to take casino money. I would say on that side, like that's a different question. And having a conversation with the donor about like, we just don't like you, like is a different one. And that's the one that the Met was going to have. Is like, we're receiving pressure from somebody else that says, because you've done this, we shouldn't take any of your money because, that makes us complicit in the sanitization of your image. And you need to decide, like, are you doing that? Like by taking the money from someone who has made it in a way that you're personally uncomfortable with, like, does that make you a bad person? Or are you going to use that money for a better purpose? And is it okay to do that? And should you encourage them to give as much money as you can and let them pretend like their image is being sanitized because you're using it for this other purpose? And again, I'm a finance person, right? So what side of that line I'm going to come down on, which is like, give me all the money. Give me all of your money. Right. Like, I don't care what you do. And that's no stain on my nonprofit because what I'm doing I don't care what the reputational benefits of the donor are in these cases. It's not up to me. Do I have, when it hits the newspaper or a blog more likely now, or Twitter, right. God forbid, right? Do we have something that we can say that makes it okay? Like, are we taking the money for a bad purpose? If somebody says you're just sanitize their money, like so what the appropriate response? Like, have you talked to your public relations team if you've got one, or if you've got an external PR consultant, have you consulted with them about what happens when this happens? If we take this money and we're having a conversation, do we need to have a conversation with the donor before we accept it? So we can say, like, look, we're so excited that you're giving us this money, but we see a reputational risk for us in accepting the money. And we don't want to make it worse by taking it. So what can we do to mitigate that fact? And a lot of donors, like, if they're in the business, they know that it's a challenge. So when the strip club reaches out to the food bank, like, we had a conversation with them. We say, we love this idea. We think it's absolutely fantastic. Do you mind if we don't promote it on our Facebook page? Right. And they were like, oh yeah, we totally get that. Right. Like, don't, because it's going to confuse a lot of people. But we're going to do it. We're going to give you the money, but we're not expecting anything from you from a promotional perspective. Right. And they were like, that's what they said, because they knew giving us the money was going to be potentially a reputational risk for us. So having that communication with donors, talking to them about it beforehand, not feeling like you're going to hurt anybody's feelings because they know what they do. They know what business they're in. They know what other reputation they already have. Like, be upfront about it.
I love that advice. And I also think on the internal lens for the organization, if you do have a gift acceptance policy, or you do decide on where that line is for your organization, please make sure you tell every single person in your organization and explain it to them, because I know, like, what I see happen out there, right, is that you see fundraisers or, people in corporate sponsorships or whatever their sweet spot is, their role is at the organization. And they are getting the pressure of, you got to get more money, you got to get more money, you got to get more money. And so sometimes that comes at the expense of this other piece. Like, they'll just reach out to anybody, right? And if the organization has strong boundaries around that, they need to know that. They need to know that. And they need to know that not all money is good money. And I don't think that organizations, sometimes these gift acceptance things stay with a couple of like the top execs, and they're never shared throughout the rest of the organization. And it's really important to make sure everyone knows.
Yeah, totally agree. The gift acceptance policy is super important, and you're 100% right. It needs to be shared throughout the entire organization so everybody's clear on it. And I don't want anybody to take what I said to mean accept every gift, because that's crazy. and I would never say that. And the one example I use all the time, when I was at the food bank, we got a check. It was only for like $25, but it came with a note that said, here's $25 for food. Please ensure that this food is only used for American citizens, right? And it's like, it's not the business we're in. Like, number one, I have, personal problems with that kind of nonsense, right? And it was only $25, so it wasn't a hard decision, right? But it was like, you write a note back and you say, thank you for your gift. Unfortunately, we can't accept it because this restriction doesn't meet our gift acceptance policy, right? And that's all you have to say. You don't have to go into detail about like, we're not taking money from the American Nazi Party, right? You just have like a blanket, like, this is just what we're saying. And then it's up to them if they want to give you another gift and like take the restriction off or do something different. That's okay with them too.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that while it's really important and great and just good for the relationship to talk to the donor, to understand, like you said, to have a very transparent conversation and be upfront about all of it, but also to see what they're hoping to get from it. That's a piece of this, but I also want to encourage our listeners to realize that ultimately it is your nonprofit's decision whether you accept that gift. And I think there's this weird power dynamic that can start to exist and creep up with donors, right? Oh, like, it's the donor, so we kind of have to do what the donor wants. And, we've got to take this money. And that's just not true, right? At the end of the day, what's in the best interest of your organization, of your reputation and brand, of those you serve? Is there a group that's going to be negatively impacted by you taking this money in some way? And if you can't stand firm with any gift you accept publicly to stand and pretend you're like back to having that PR person, if you can't stand on a live audience or with 10 cameras on you and defend why you accepted that gift, then you shouldn't be in the business of accepting it. So.
Yeah. And on the converse, if you can't do the same thing to say why you rejected the gift.
Yeah. That's
the exact same question. You have to be perfectly clear.
Yeah.
What a great question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening. We really appreciate that you've taken the time out of your very busy schedule to spend a half an hour with Stacy and I once every couple of weeks. Send us questions. Nonprofiteverything.com is the website. You can also send it to questions@nonprofiteverything.com. Honestly, anything at nonprofiteverything.com. It'll show up in our inbox and we will put it in the queue to answer on a later episode. You can also head over to nonprofiteverything.com to see the archive of all the old episodes if you need to catch up. No reason not to. And with that, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.